everyone has the opportunity to plug into the Bitcoin network. You don't really require much more work than studying hard and being diligent about the strategy. So I think it's possible for any public company, and probably irresponsible for a public company with cash just to hold that cash and not to at least consider Bitcoin as a possible alternative.
I want to start with a lot of people have heard about the Bitcoin treasury strategy. Can you walk us through step by step the Metaplanet story from where you guys kind of started, things weren't going so well, what was the decision-making process like, and then how did you eventually kind of get started with this?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. So I started my career actually at Goldman as a derivatives trader. I was working in Tokyo. Did that for 5.5 years and decided to become an entrepreneur and moved to Thailand, started a hotel company. Grew that hotel company to 30 properties across Southeast Asia. We ultimately re-entered the Japan market. And then COVID happened. And COVID was obviously a very difficult period for those in the hospitality industry. And there was a lot of soul searching at the depths of COVID. Most of our markets were forcibly closed. We had no choice but to close the doors, and we had zero revenue. I think no business person expects to have zero revenue in their kind of worst models. And I guess I was sitting there watching podcasts and watched Michael Saylor talk about his journey, and at the beginning of 2020 thinking about what to do with his company, with his $500 million, I suppose, of cash at that time, and where to deploy that, explored all sorts of different opportunities, and then came to the conclusion that Bitcoin was where he wanted to place his company's money. And that was still early on. We were in the middle of COVID, still trying to survive, trying to raise capital. And I think it must have been 2023, towards the end, when we really had no choice. The Japanese regulator had, our auditor had put a going concern footnote in our financials, which makes it very difficult to operate. And at that time, our board and shareholders said, try something, try anything. And I was quite passionate about Bitcoin on the side for some time. It was something that I dabbled in from as early on as 2012, and was always really finding a path where we could connect business with Bitcoin. And so at the end of 2023, sat the board down and said, let's explore this. Let's investigate how we can go about adopting Bitcoin as our treasury reserve asset. So it was a number of months of sort of hard work, but in April of last year, we formally adopted a Bitcoin standard. Our market cap at that time was only $12 million. So it was the beginning of a very exciting journey.
You have $12 million market cap. I believe that the number for last year's performance was 3,200%, or maybe that's the trailing since you've done this. That is literally the best performance in the entire world. A big part of putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet is Bitcoin goes up. But I think the more interesting thing to talk about is you can't just buy one time. You have to continuously accumulate more and more and more Bitcoin, and it's almost the aggressiveness. It's the size of the bet more so than the direction of the bet is really what I think has driven a lot of this. And so talk through, you make the first purchase, you kind of announce it. What was the reaction from the Japanese market? What was the reaction from shareholders? And then how do you kind of navigate really just kind of keeping your foot on the gas and continuing to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible?
It's been quite the journey. I think when we decided first to buy Bitcoin, it was something that we thought would be good for the company as an alternative to the status quo. It wasn't until many months later when we began to see the comments that would come on Twitter and the local web boards, the difference that we were making to the local Japanese investor. Japan's a place where interest rates are incredibly low, and there's limited opportunities for people to earn a yield much more than zero. In fact, Japan has one of the largest so-called household savings. They have $9 trillion of cash sitting in bank accounts earning nothing. I think people have been curious about Bitcoin, but it's been rather difficult to acquire Bitcoin. Mt. Gox was the famous exchange where I bought my first Bitcoin, where I think Japan was a leader at that time. And as a result of Mt. Gox, regulation became rather strict, and that has been the case kind of ever since. And so if I sit at a meal with a friend or a friend of a friend and try to orange pill them, and at the end of the meal they say, yes, I'd like to buy Bitcoin, it takes 6 weeks, if they're diligent, to be able to buy their first Bitcoin. And that's really because the exchanges, it's not their fault. They're required to send all sorts of long, detailed disclosure documents to investors, share with them that they might lose everything. And then in Japan, it's quite quirky. They have to send you a postcard in the mail to confirm your address. So all that takes time. We then discovered that people found out about us and that we were a proxy for Bitcoin. And everybody has a brokerage account, maybe 2 brokerage accounts on their mobile phone. And so when they realized that we were a way for them to get exposure to Bitcoin, it was very easy for them to press that button on their phone and buy some shares. On the, I guess, the bit about acceleration, it's obviously very important to not just have 5 or 10 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. You have to be disciplined and focused. So for us, our goal is to become the largest holder of Bitcoin in Asia. We have, 2,235 Bitcoin now, so puts us up there kind of in the top 20. It's a very big gap when you go from there to the leaders, but we feel very confident that over the next year or two, we can get to a point where I guess I can more proudly say that we're a large Bitcoin holder. Now we're still in that no man's land.
Now, you have a plethora of financial tools at your disposal. We've seen people sell straight equity in these ATMs. We've seen convertible notes. We've seen preferred. There's all kinds of different tools. Maybe walk us through what are the tools that you've used so far, and how do you evaluate, okay, I need more capital. I'm going to use this tool versus another tool. Here's the pros and cons.
Sure. So we're still early on in our journey. We traded a reasonable premium to our NAV. And so the most important thing for us now is to ensure that we can grow a large enough base of Bitcoin for us to be able to use some of the more interesting ways to raise capital. And to be specific, MicroStrategy started off really raising equity. They had an ATM structure which they, I think, have successfully executed over the past 24 months, but particularly in the last 12 months. They've now moved on to, have for a while now, convertible bonds. They have this interesting perpetual preferred instrument. In Japan, unfortunately, there's no ATM structure. And that's been an incredible, innovative offering that exists in the US. So we were looking for a workaround. And we discovered a workaround which is effectively a moving strike warrant. So in at-the-money offerings, companies are selling new shares directly into the market. For a moving strike warrant, what our partner is doing is they're effectively shorting borrowed shares. The cash they get from shorting the shares they use to exercise the moving strike warrants. Cash comes into the company, and then the new shares are basically used to repay or return the shares that have been borrowed. So it's effectively the same as an at-the-money structure. So we've been doing that now. We've raised about $200 million of capital since we started. The plan right now is to continue to do this ATM lookalike. And then I think once we have enough Bitcoin on the balance sheet, we can start to look at debt instruments. I think it will work incredibly well in Japan, even more so than the US, just because, again, the lower yield expectations that locals have.
So there's lower yield expectations, but Japan also has a number of other maybe advantages economically for this specific strategy. Talk a little bit about interest rates, currencies, and other things that you think are somewhat tailwinds to what you're doing.
Sure. So purchasing power, of the yen since the late 80s has declined almost 2/3. And I think people are beginning to feel that pinch. The yen has weakened. I speak to friends who used to like to travel abroad all the time. Now there's a lot more domestic tourism, which is good. But people can feel the fact that they can't, the yen doesn't go as far anymore. And so part of our narrative is, we want to help hedge against a yen that's depreciating in value, inflation, but also doing so with Bitcoin on the balance sheet. I think the more interesting part, which is something we discovered a little bit later, was the tax arbitrage. And so if a Japanese individual wants to buy Bitcoin, the capital gains tax is up to 55%. That's the highest of any country in the world, which is a bit extraordinary, and I think something that has to change over time. If they buy a listed company, the tax is only 20%. And if they buy a listed company in a retirement account, then tax on capital gains is zero. And so we've now become the most efficient leveraged exposure to Bitcoin that exists for individual investors in Japan.
When you are doing this in Japan, I think you became the most popular stock by trading volume. You were the best performing stock in the entire world last year. But this is not only happening in a silo in Japan. When I see you tweet English and Japanese. I see that you talk with U.S. institutions. I see that there are people all around the world, not just in the United States or in Japan, talking about this. So it's this weird situation where you're really benefiting from a lot of what happens, internally in Japan, but it is a global story. And so talk about how do you straddle that line between you want to continue to appease Japanese markets, but also you want to participate in maybe the global conversation in the global capital markets.
It's no secret that Bitcoin ETFs have taken Wall Street by storm. With over $35 billion in assets in just 1 year, it's become the most successful ETF launch in history. My partner Bitwise is the first and only Bitcoin ETF provider to openly publish its Bitcoin wallet addresses, allowing anyone to verify the fund's holdings. I believe this level of transparency is exactly the kind of innovation that only crypto makes possible. Bitwise is also the only ETF issuer that is a crypto specialist asset manager, meaning their team solely focuses on Bitcoin, and they have the research, education, and support to help investors navigate the space with confidence. All of that is great, but what I love most about Bitwise is probably their commitment to developers. Bitwise donates 10% of their ETF's profits to Bitcoin open source developers. Bitcoin developers are the unsung heroes, working tirelessly to maintain, improve, and innovate the blockchain. Their efforts ensure that Bitcoin remains true to its promise as a decentralized system that is built to last. Go to bitwisepomp.com to learn more about their ETF and other services. Once again, that's bitwisepomp.com. bitwisepomp.com. As always, remember investing is risky and carefully consider the extreme risks associated with crypto before you invest. Today's episode is brought to you by Gemini. The future is being built today, and the future of currency isn't dollars, euros, pounds, or yen. It's crypto. And Gemini thinks that's a great thing. Because a future where money is decentralized, inclusive, and globally accessible, that's a future that we are anxious to be a part of. Gemini teamed up with futurists, technologists, and designers like award-winning artist Matt Griffin, known for his illustrations for Dune, to craft a vision of the future with crypto at its core. The creative theme, Go Where Dollars Won't, emphasizes exploration, growth, and the crypto market's limitless potential. Whether it's going on that Martian safari to capture an unforgettable photo of a herd of woolly mammoths grazing the red planet, or using Bitcoin to pay for your lift pass to go strata skiing down the mountain peak of a breathtaking comet. Whatever adventures we'll be living, one thing is for sure. In a future this fantastic, the limits of traditional currency simply cannot keep up. Financial innovation will usher in this new frontier, and so go where dollars won't with Gemini. Go check them out at gemini.com/go where dollars won't. Again, go check it out at gemini.com/go where dollars won't.
Obviously, Bitcoin is a global commodity. It's a global, beautiful instrument that I think more and more people are beginning to discover. Japan is one of the most liquid markets in the world, and so it doesn't make sense for us to be siloed in Japan. Now, Japan, we've become a stock that retail investors love, but I think there are a lot of smart institutions that see a lot more flow coming into Bitcoin treasury companies in Japan, and it's a very good way for them to play that. I think, incidentally, I've been speaking a lot to Asian fund managers recently, and a lot of them are lamenting the fact that they've underperformed their US peers that own MicroStrategy. And so when they discovered us and that we were a proxy, in a sense, for strategy, that they'd be able to buy us and compete favorably with those that are able to buy. And so I think what Michael Saylor discovered many years ago is that there's many pools of capital in the world that are looking for exposure to Bitcoin. And traditionally, you have to just buy Bitcoin. Now you can buy the ETF. Now you can buy MicroStrategy. But debt investors are able to buy convertible debt. And so in the same way, we hope in Japan to tap into different pools of capital, not just retail investors, but institutional investors locally in Japan and also beyond. So we're very honored and humbled by the fact that institutional investors in all parts of the world are now beginning to show interest, where we've been included in a